Hi, everybody. Thank you to Max and Simon for this amazing opportunity to share my passion over the last 17 years and feeling like I was floating on an island on my own when I was talking about mental health and people were coming to me with depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizoid disorders, and I asked them what they ate. People looked at me like I had two heads. Not so much anymore. Thanks to Max and Simon for this amazing opportunity to do so. So, what are you feeding your mental health? So when we talk about chaos or calm, chaos is basically unconsciousness. And I'm glad I followed Pran because you're speaking my language. And calm is consciousness. Firstly, I just want to talk about any disclosures financially or affiliates. I don't have any. I only make my income through my practice. So any person that I mention today or my resources that I talk about, I do so because I greatly respect their work and people that I work with in an integrative GP world. As a culture and as a species, we are starving with our bellies are full. We are a species, like any other species on the planet. We have a specific requirement to thrive. So for example, a lion species, would it eat kale? Probably not. If it did, it wouldn't do it for very long because it would get sick. Any single animal that you see in the wild and even in zoos are fed a species-appropriate food. We are no different. Unfortunately, though, we have been conditioned and programmed to think that we can function at a high state of consciousness with this kind of food. And balance and moderation does not exist when you are living in an unconscious, not well body or mind. So your mental and metabolic health are connected. As we said earlier, we are overfed and undernourished. Now, a lot of that comes from the fact that we're only looking at the symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms. No one is asking the deep root causes of why and how. Now, in my role as a psychotherapist and understanding the power of nutrition, but also understanding that we are a soul and we are greater than we can ever expect, okay? The role of nutrition in depression and anxiety has been around for a very, very long time. I'm talking the 1920s here with Abram Hoffa, Linus Pauling. If you don't know who they are, they're an amazing, nutritional psychotherapist and even psychiatry from that time. The biggest thing is, in psychology, sadly, still today, we separate our head from our body. We talk to the brain, we talk, but we don't connect the brain and the head to the body. We also have a gut in there, which I referred later as our first brain. The thing is, you can show up and talk, and you're never getting to the bottom of the root cause, which is also really disempowering. So when we talk about centralization and decentralization, the current method and models are so disempowering and they are centralized. So at least 46% of the world's population suffer from declining in metabolic health, and this statistic grows every single day. We are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Nothing is changing. But unfortunately, because the questions that we need to ask make people feel really, really uncomfortable, and it also goes against the grain of what we believe we have been told to thrive as humans. One of the big things, Dr. Mark Horowitz, he's a psychiatrist in the US, in the 1960s, there was a philosophy around the fact that if you have a mental health problem, that you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. Going through my psychology training, I was always the annoying, like when you got a kid in the back of the car that's like, when are we there yet? When are we there yet? That was me in talking to, mentors and people who were teaching us this CBT therapy. I'd be like, well, why? What tests do we do for that? Oh, we don't. Okay, but why? So if we're telling people that they have a chemical imbalance in the brain, mainly serotonin, that was the Trojan horse, why aren't we testing it? We still don't test it. So effectively, what that means is the importance that people must know is the idea that depression results from a chemical imbalance. It's hypothetical because we don't know. But the Trojan horse for that was pharmaceutical drugs. So lead that in. And I think we've experienced many Trojan horses in the last couple of years. So basically what we're also saying is that it's meant to change or increase serotonin in the brain. Now, yes, there is an element of that with an SSRI where if you have your serotonin in your brain and it does hold the serotonin to basically uptake it so that you can feel, we would say, better. My words with that to be blunted and emotionally dysregulated. Now, the conclusion of that is that the SSRI antidepressants are worthwhile, or are they even completely safe? They're not, because the thing is once you get one antidepressant, then that doesn't work, then you give it another one, then you give it another one, and then you also end up, also two antidepressants also increase the ability for type 2 diabetes. So then you've got another tablet, and then you can't sleep, so then you're given another tablet. We're still not asking the question, why? As again, moderation and balance are made up, and we aren't getting better from the lack of pharmaceutical drugs that are at our fingertips. Now, most conversations, as I said before, around mental health are always between the brain. Let's talk to the brain, let's find out what your programming is, let's talk about mum, let's talk about dad, let's go back, let's talk about when you were 10. Really? Meanwhile, your consciousness is going, I've done this 20 times before, and I've also been doing this for 10 years, saying the same thing over and over and over. What are we missing? We're missing the unconscious part of our mind that's been programmed to understand how we operate and how we've been programmed between the age of 0 to 7. Now, as we said before, you can talk to a starving brain for as long as you like, but it will never, ever get you to the point of consciousness until you understand you're a whole human, a whole soul with an energetic battery that we are decharging every single day. Now, one of the most amazing things is we're also not told is that you actually have the ability to directly impact your neurotransmitters, the way you feed yourself, the way you think about yourself, the way that you perceive the world through what lens you're looking at. And that's something that we're not told. And the other thing that we're not told is that serotonin, over 90%, as you said there, it's made in your gut. Did anyone know that? I know the practitioners here that might do, but people that are unaware of that, that is also directly made in your gastrointestinal tract. And the serotonin that we need, we also need a precursor from tryptophan, which comes from food. Now, the limited access to antidepressants are not the cause of the epidemic, and the failure to address the root cause of the depression is the problem. Not only depression that falls into this category, but it's also type 2 diabetes, autoimmune, obesity, and ADHD, all the Ds, all the As, whatever. Now, this is Australia. This is pretty horrific. So, 44.4 million people between the years of 2021 and 22 were given a mental health related medication script. 4.7 of those people filled that mental health script with antidepressants. Are we asking questions around what's going on in your life? Please tell me what you eat. Now, the majority of the time in the people that I've seen over the years of working in this, it's situational depression with relation to, one, understanding your programming, how you think, how your mind works, about yourself, your values, your belief structures, and how you operate within the world. Now, when we talk about the world, people go, oh my God, the world's falling apart. No, the world's not falling apart. It's the people that are running the world that is causing the problem. Your reality is your reality to build. We do not have to get involved in other people's realities unless we choose. However, if we're looking at the GPM element of people who actually describe antidepressants, GPs are the highest. And I know clients of mine that have come to see me and they've like literally it was like, oh, you're sad? Okay, yep, cool. Here's a pill. And 74% of those mental health prescriptions were all for antidepressants. So even now, so when I talk about probably 15 years ago, it was probably 1 in 4 that had some kind of, anxiety disorder or long-term anxiety disorder. And even with autoimmune, now it's getting up to 1 in 2 to 1 in 3. Why? So our external world and our internal environment alongside nutrition is how we charge ourselves. Every single thing is messengers. And what we have to also ask ourselves is how are we charging our mind and our body? We are one big battery cell. So if anyone understands what the word mitochondria is, they are literally a cell that runs our body. They need energy. Now, where do we get that energy from? We get that energy from the earth, what we eat, how we feel, who we are around. Never, ever, ever discount the fact that you are one big walking battery with energy charging at all times. But where are you getting your energy source from? So this is where most people get it from. Oxidative stress and inflammation. So this is what I call the SAD diet. And also too, as Pram put up before, the Australian dietary guidelines, Americans the same. We don't want to do that. Now, I call it the SAD diet because it makes us sad, anxious and depressed. And also what it does, it's also what I call self-administered diabetes. Because it is. Now, as I say these things too, your mind is always listening, both consciously and unconsciously. So the thing is, there's going to be belief structures here and value structures that potentially whenever you hear me say something, you may get a reaction, you may get a trigger. It's designed to do that because that's allowing you to understand that this is information that is in cognitive conflict with your value structures or what you have believed to be told to be true. Now, the other thing is the sugar industry makes around $1 trillion every year, and we actually spend $2.4 trillion on the symptoms. And that's basically caused by every single middle aisle of the supermarket. If you're shopping in there, you're malnourished. Your brain is malnourished. Your energy, your soul is malnourished. The other thing is, when we talk about modern diseases, it's so blatantly obviously where they come from. It's our modern diet. As again, we're a species. And also to insulin, like Ozempic, all of these things, again, it's not treating the root cause. Even with people that I've worked with that have had stomach, surgery to make their stomach smaller, yes, they shrink, but every single thing in their mind is still the same. They're still conflicted. They still don't like themselves. They are still lost. So shrinking your body without understanding the power of your mind, consciously and unconsciously, does not change a thing. It's the same thing when you diet, for example, and yeah, that's pretty attractive. This is creating absolute chaos in our environment and in our cells. So when I talk about chaos again, this is all unconsciousness. So we've been told to stay out of the sun, slather yourself with sunscreen and, slip, slop, slap. That kills your vitamin D and it also doesn't help you make dopamine either. So dopamine, again, is something as a species that we are meant to earn. What we're doing here is this is how we're earning our dopamine. It's firing all day, every day. By sitting on the couch, ordering Uber, going through your screens, you are wasting your precious dopamine with this. But guess what? This is what we're conditioned, a lot of us, to do, right? We get trapped. That is unconscious behaviour. And all the little pretty colours with the tiny teddies. It's done for a reason. It's colour, it's bright. The other thing is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but companies spend billions and billions of dollars to make a bliss point spot of products, which is basically trans fat, salt and sugar. You put that combination together, that's why you just can't have one biscuit, you eat the whole packet. Or I'm just going to have half a bag of chips, then you end up eating the whole packet. Now, there's an addiction process and attachment to food also. We are very emotionally driven by food. It's very personal. But also too, if we have underlying attachments to food through our emotions, that's also where we get stuck. So, we only have one gut and we only have one brain. But unfortunately, the previous slide is damaging that. And if we're eating from the middle aisles of the supermarket and we're not eating a species-appropriate way of life, this is getting damaged day in, day out. Now, the other thing is, like the saying, like when you go to Vegas, what stays in Vegas, you don't talk about. That doesn't happen here. What stays in your gut, if you've got a leaky gut from years and years of either high stress, really bad food, inflammation, everything's going to leak out and it's going to go up to your brain and vice versa. So this is done by the vagus nerve and they communicate with each other every single day. So, for example, if you're eating inflammatory foods, which are inflaming your brain, so even back in the late 70s, early 80s, we talked about depression as being an inflammation of the mind and the brain. We're still there, and this is why. So every single time you diet, and again, when we even look at the word, say, carnivore diet or ketogenic diet, a lot of people, because of their unconscious and their past patterning and programming around diets, automatically you're going to be in a conflict again because you're going to be in your past experiences of how many diets you've been on in the past. Species people don't diet. We just eat a species-appropriate food. And the other thing is too, every single time you feed and fuel and nourish, there are my 3 high qualities of when I talk to my clients. Feed, fuel, and nourish. When you start eating a species-appropriate way and you start to feel better, you're getting into ketosis, everything's starting to wake up, you're also getting a lot more consciousness. If you eat a standard Australian or American diet, you are unconsciously living outside of your alignment. When you get into a species-appropriate way of eating, you wake up. Now, when you wake up, going backwards is really difficult, but there's always a little bit of a caveat between, oh, I feel really good, this feels really good, oh, I might just treat myself. Every single time you do that with something that's inflammation or junk food, it's like picking up your brain and dropping it on the floor every single time. Now, species prescription, nutritional therapy. Could you imagine, like when you walk into your doctors and we're so conditioned to hear prescription, here you go, here's a prescription, we go and take it. Could you imagine if we started talking about food as a prescription? I think we'd have probably a little bit more compliance. However, maybe not. So, in my practice, I have been, just a little bit about me, I have been carnivore now for over 5 years. And the reason for that is I was borderline type 2 diabetic because I was from the bodybuilding background and that got me into a lot of problems. I went carnivore to reverse that, but also to the bonus from that was I got rid of my asthma, my eczema and my hay fever, and I reversed my insulin resistance. So for me, that was a personal experience, but then also to long-term in my practice, I've always used low-carb, ketogenic, high-fat way of eating and now incorporating carnivore with amazing success. Not just with depression or anxiety, but also too with eating disorders and also alcoholism. So that's also really not spoken about much, is the fact that ketosis on the brain for alcoholics is phenomenal. The reason why I say that is alcohol is sugar. So again, we're feeding an emotion and we're feeding programming and not feeling good about ourselves and whatever experiences we've had that we're using those anchors. But the fact of the matter is when you go to an AA meeting and you're trying to stop drinking and all they have on the sides to eat is just junk food and sugar. It's a great way to trigger an alcoholic to have another episode. What is species nutrition? Well, it's ancient food. It's literally my personal experience and what I know works amazingly with my clients is carnivore and ketogenic. Every single person is looked at uniquely and specifically for what they need. So every single person that comes to me, they are either at the end of their tether, and they've had enough, and they're sick of going around in the circle and the loop of feeling stuck and really just getting by and not thriving. So the other thing really is important is to understand humans need essential amino acids. Now, it's not by accident that I don't think that cows provide us with the most powerful nutrition on the planet. And I know it's weird that we're talking about it, in 2024, but this has been around for a long, long, long time. However, the other thing is understanding how we create calm through consciousness or chaos through unconsciousness is also understanding how your mind works and why it does what it does. So if you go and get a script for an antidepressant, are they telling you, hey, let me explain how your mind works? Do you know what your conscious mind does? Do you know what your unconscious mind does? Do you know how conscious and unconscious your body can be? Can you understand the power that you have to reprogram and repattern yourself? Well, the other thing is too, is anything that actually, as I said, in the middle aisles of the supermarket, it's not species appropriate. However, there is an emotional attachment to those foods because a lot of human beings, we eat our emotions, whether we're happy, sad, indifferent, stressed, celebrations. We poison ourselves. For example, if you have type 2 diabetes and you go out and celebrate and you're like, oh gosh, I'd really love that cake, that's effectively you're entertaining yourself with poison. Now, when I'm talking about anyone that has a mental or metabolic health problem, this must come as a very high value. But unfortunately, the way we're programmed, it doesn't. And you'd probably think it would. Like if someone said, I'm going to label myself with depression, or I've got XYZ, or I've got an eating disorder, you've got to be really mindful also about how you speak to yourself, because the I am statements, your mind's going to grab onto immediately. So one thing that I really love about meat, not the fact that it tastes great, but it's really important to understand that majority of the studies that are out there that people who remove meat from their diet have increased incidence of, say, depression and anxiety because they're not being fed properly. The gut is not being fed properly with the right amino acids and the right nutrients. So one of the things that I love talking about is the fact that our brains need fat. The low-fat movement, fat's going to make you fat. Hopefully we all know that that's not true. Otherwise, we'd all be at the size of houses. The other thing is in meat, also I'll just go back a little bit, your brain is a really greedy organ. It will, grab everything it can to function. Now, DHA is one of the most critical parts of what meat offers for your brain. Now, the other thing that you'll find is whenever you talk to anyone that has actually been on a ketogenic or high ketosis carnivore way of life for a long time, the way that you start to wake up consciously, we need DHA because it's actually responsible for higher order thinking. Now, kind of what's happening in the centralized world, they don't want you order-eye thinking. Why is that? Because unfortunately, human beings, we are very, very suggestible when it comes to fear. The minute there is fear, whether it's internal or external, you can do anything. You can tell anyone anything and you will act. Fear has been driven in society for many, 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 many centuries. Now, the other thing is around plant foods. I've got clients that eat plants. Some do. It's all fine. But it's just about their tolerance and their carbohydrate tolerance and their gut tolerance with certain plants, and that's okay. But as I said, everything's designed specifically for them. However, the other thing is also understanding that plant foods absolutely have no DHA or very small amounts. So the body, when you eat a plant, it doesn't really convert it from ALA very well to DHA. So it's a conversion process that the body needs to go through. So I just basically say, well, let's just kick that stuff out and let's put in majority of the nutrition that our brains need, both for higher consciousness thinking. Oh, that's a study there if anyone wants to know it. Now, everything that we've spoken about, around nutrition, food, understanding what a species-appropriate way is eating. And most people know that junk food is not great. But you know what? A McDonald's treat here and there depends on how your gut reacts and how you feel after it. None of that is actually going to make any sense or do anything until you understand if you have a relationship with yourself and if you value your mental and metabolic health. I know that sounds strange because you kind of go, sure, of course I do. But most of the time when I ask people that question, it's in direct opposition to what their behaviours are and their patterns. Now, I'm going to take you on a little deep dive into your mind. What we need to also understand is our precognitive system. So as human beings, we are conditioned over and over and over. And we also walk around in what I call a waking state of hypnosis. So we actually hypnotise ourselves every single day by doing the same thing over and over and over, again and again and again. And then we ask ourselves why, I know that's not really good for me, but I just keep doing it. Does it make sense to everyone? Yep. But then what happens is then we think that we're bad. We think that there's something wrong with us. It's the same thing with going back to antidepressants. If you are told that you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, you automatically think, I'm broken. There is something wrong with me. There isn't. You've just not been given the right information, and you also haven't been given the information around how powerful you are when you understand how your mind works. So 0 to 7 is our precognitive phase where we have no ability to understand what we're taking on. Everyone in authority to us is literally our values, our systems, and our belief structures. So most people are operating on our environmental belief structures, not our own, and our values drive our behaviour. So if you valued your mental and metabolic health, your behaviour would support you in that, but that's not what we see. Now, the other thing is we also learn about what food is. Who was given a treat as a kid? Stop crying, here's some chocolate. We're not dogs, we shouldn't be eating treats, right? The fact of the matter is, why are we giving fast food, junky food as treats? Why? Because it automatically gives you a dopamine high and a pleasure, and you're in it, and you're like, oh. So also too, you program your body every single time. If you have an emotion and you are stressed, or I'm sad, or whatever label you want to put on it, the minute that you anchor that behaviour in ice cream or donuts or anything that's not species appropriate, every single thing in your system calms down. Guess what? That feels nice. That anchored my stress. So then guess what? When you're stressed again, guess what you're going to do? You're going to go back to the same anchor because you're conditioning and you're programming your body in an hypnotic, processed way. Now, the other thing is we're all on autopilot. 90% of the things that we do is all unconscious. 10% is conscious. And a lot of the work that I do, I help my clients work through understanding from their unconsciousness, getting them into consciousness, which is what we call the unknown. That's very scary for a lot of people. Because you know what? Your mind has the amazing ability of what it does, it either goes backwards into the past or it goes forward into the future. We're always either in the past with our thinking or we're always in the future, and then we get anxiety because we're like, oh my gosh, I've been living this for 10 years. I hope the next 10 years is not the same. Half the human race do not understand where their mind is travelling to every single day. It's either in the past or it's in the future. It's never present. Because when we're present, what do we have? Consciousness. But that's unfamiliar. We have to reprogram ourselves. We have to hypnotise ourselves back into a highest conscious state. Also, 95% of individuals actually don't like who they are. The amount of negative talk that I hear from my clients about themselves and how down they are and the languaging that they use with themselves, I'm like, no wonder you're sad. Like, you can't talk to yourself that way. Now, the reason why we do that is because we're actually programmed that because our external values that we learn between that 0 to 7 and 7 to 12 are all anchored outside of ourselves. Love other people, respect other people, do other people, everything's outside. So if I actually said to anyone in this room, think about how you love other people, how you respect other people, bringing happiness and joy to other people and how you talk to other people. I'll guarantee you, if I asked you to intern that inside yourself, it would be a very different story. So the saying also too is if you speak to yourself the way if you spoke to others that way, you wouldn't have very many people around you. Or you would, but you collect the same people on the same level of consciousness with the same energy. Now, the other thing is we're so conditioned to think about what other people think. I'm going to tell you one thing. One other part of the work that I do is understanding what your self-image is. So most people are operating in a very negative self-image and self-worth and lack within themselves. What you think other people are thinking about you is actually your own unconscious negative self-image speaking to you. It's not other people. And that takes some ownership, right? And a lot of the time, it's also not our voice. And what I mean by that is, we may have heard that at school, mum and dad may have said something in a random angry moment, but as a child, we just take that on board. We have no ability to filter that out. Now, we also live in a world of comfort. It's like it's winter now and it's like, let's get out and ground ourselves in the cold and go for a walk. Oh God, no, it's too cold. Humans are conditioning themselves to be comfortable. Species don't do that. We have to have opposition. We have to have warmth. We have to have cold. You have to get your body into different states of energy because that's what feeds, one, your neurotransmitters, but it also feeds your dopamine. It also feeds every single part of your energy. Now, emotional dysregulation, most people live outside themselves and they're emotionally dysregulated because, again, we're concerned about what other people think, especially when we start changing the way that we eat. This is such a big social issue when you've gone from eating what everyone else eats and then you move into eating a carnivore or ketogenic way of life to heal your mental and metabolic health. People are so scared of what other people are going to say about your steak on your plate instead of your chips and your salad. Now, I always say to people, if someone's going to get offended or upset by your steak without your chips, that has nothing to do with you. That has to do with them and their mirror reflection of you. Everyone's a mirror, but you've got to be conscious to see that. We get triggered left, right and centre and we always think it's the world or someone's done something to us. No, it's an invitation to understand yourself at a deeper level. And as I said, we're creatures of habits who do the same thing over and over and over. This is where we live most of the time. This is unconscious pattern behaviour. And again, we anchor our emotions in things that don't hold value. And also as a society, we're so obsessed with food. Like you talk to anyone that eats a kind of ketogenic or carnivore way, you're like, I'll just eat when I'm hungry and I'll stop when I'm not, and then I've got all these hours in my day to actually not think about food. But at the same time, you're feeding a value of your mental and metabolic health. I cannot stress enough to you to understand your internal values and the relationship with yourself is the key to understanding, getting into the connection with the consciousness of yourself, and then also too stepping into a higher consciousness of living in the present moment. So that's what gets you also into observer. When you can actually understand the difference between your unconscious and conscious and the gap in between, that's when you become the observer. And yes, we are what I tend to call our human little bodysuits that we walk around in, but that's the one that we get lost in. Now, the other really thing before I wrap up is to ask yourself before you do anything, is this choice going to create more chaos? And will it keep me in the same place just for the sake of a few minutes of pleasure and escape from my emotions? You don't have to act on a craving. You're not going to die if you don't get the bread or the muffin. But you have to sit in the emotion. That's where your power is. That's where you raise your consciousness to start going through instead of around. And am I willing to get uncomfortable and unfamiliar to heal the relationship with myself and feed my mental and metabolic health? That takes change. The other thing with society, it's like, oh, you don't have to change. Yeah, you do. If you want to change your whole entire being and get back to connection with your soul and get into a higher consciousness state with yourself, you have to change. Now, that may be uncomfortable for other people, but that's not your permission to dive back into that unless you choose. We choose depending on where you choose from, whether you're unconscious or conscious. Now, these are my non-negotiables. Are you ready to hunt for your superhuman version of yourself? Sleep. Now, these are in really no particular order. They're all important. Sleep, sun, movement, stillness, which brings you back to yourself. Most people do not sit with themselves very well. That's where you sit and you hear and connect with your soul in your higher conscious state. Nutrients, know your source, know where your food's coming from. Water, restructured water. Spiritual grounding. Connect with your soul and your spirit. I cannot tell you how powerful that is, but you have to get out of the sad, anxious diet culture. Purpose. Before anyone labels you or you label yourself with depression or anything else, and I'm not talking about long-term schizoid disorders here, I'm just talking about the main thing today around depression because that's the most common. Make sure that you are living in alignment with yourself and you are not living outside of yourself and your identity in the things that society deem as appropriate. I see every single person that I talk to with depression, they have no purpose. They are not connected with their soul and they're out of alignment because they're living for other people, not themselves. And we've also led to believe that that's indulgent or selfish. Relationship with yourself, ultimate. That's what we have to work on. You have to love yourself, respect yourself, and the company that you keep. Chaos creates chaos. Calmness creates calm. Now, the difference between obligation and commitment is that obligation comes from outside of yourself and commitments come from within. Reduce your obligations. Expectations of what other people think around what you are doing to feed and fuel and nourish your brain and your health and your gut and your body and your soul. Strengthen your commitments to your mental and metabolic health. And they're all the amazing people, if you want to take a list of that I use resources from and know personally. And all of them you'll probably be aware of. Yeah. Thanks.